Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Stream Time Sports. I'm your host Nick Meacham and thrilled to be joined by my two next guests who we collectively had such a great time on stage in London at the Sports Pro Live event talking about big tech. We had to get the band back together again and also because we didn't get a chance to cover about half the companies I wanted to cover at the time. So basically, let's jump straight into it. Obviously, we do talk a lot about big tech and its role in different guises. We talk a lot in this podcast around some of the strategic moves we're seeing from some of the big names we're going to cover today. This is an opportunity for us to take a little bit of a step back and get more of a wider lens on the macro, the bigger strategy that they've been taking across the industry. So I'm really thrilled to have Steve McCaskill back again on the podcast, the technology editor for Sports Pro. Steve, obviously you're someone who is writing and producing a lot of great content around big tech companies and sports media. So had to have you back on once again for this, not just because I had you at live, of course, and they're probably our most regular guest on the show as well.
I'm glad to keep up the streak. Thank you.
and with us again is Lydia Fairfax, who, as I intro for those who did listen to the podcast and the live recording we had at Sports Pro Live, comes with over 10 years experience at the Warner Brothers Discovery business, right at a time where they've gone through a lot of changes through ownership and strategy over that period, and now runs her own consultancy business, Triple Crown Consulting, helping properties work out the best approach to their media strategy. Thanks again, Lydia, for joining us.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Steve. Yeah, great to be involved again. Looking forward to the conversation.
Right. So where we left things last time is we spoke about Amazon and we spoke about Apple briefly. We spoke about some of those major brands, but one of the companies we didn't get a chance to spend time on, in fact, it's probably the one I would like to spend the most time on, is the Comcast and Sky juggernaut. I call them juggernauts because I really think that what Sky as an organization has built over the last 10, 20 years in markets like the UK in particular is arguably the most dominant position of any sports media organization globally. So to set, I guess, a bit of the scene around the scale of Comcast and Sky, let's take a step back to, firstly, the Comcast, in particular the US side of things. In the US, that mainly consists of the NBC Universal business, which incorporates NBC and Peacock. Peacock is running from memory, it's a subscription and also an ad-funded model, so a hybrid model on that side. Sports has always been quite a key component of their strategy in the US, mainly funding historically the NBC approach, which has been free-to-air, so it's been advertising funded on that side. They are by far the biggest investor in the Premier League outside of the Sky relationship globally. So it's interesting just that the Sky and Comcast and Sky and NBC are the two biggest investors into that space. They recently did that deal with Peacock to have the NFL playoffs streamed live exclusively for the first time, which created a lot of media attention because of the role or the importance of the NBA playoffs. And it was a sort of a turning point for that investment to be shifted just to an exclusive streaming proposition, and by and large, most people consider that to be a big success for them to drive new subscriptions. So let's start there in terms of their approach on the US side. We've had Rick Cordella, who's now the head of NBC Sports. I think he's the president of, if I remember the title correctly, on the podcast before. And we've also had John Miller, who is the head of programming for the business for the best part of 35 years and had some great stories to share with us. But Steve, starting with you, what's your take on the positioning of NBC and particularly Peacock and the moves that perhaps it's been making in the sports space over the last few years in the US?
I think NBC and Peacock are probably the most committed to sport of the streaming services in the US. They all have sport. Paramount Plus has sport. Obviously Max has a certain element of it. Disney Plus doesn't quite, but there's ESPN Plus on the side. But if you look at how intrinsic sport is to one of these multi-genre streaming services, Peacock would be leading that conversation. It has NBC's own coverage, which again in the US, it's a bit strange given that NBC is free to air, but most people watch free to air TV over cable, and therefore having it on a streaming service is a selling point, which takes me a while to get my head around. Being in the UK and we have everything on iPlayer and ITVX, etc. So that's one thing. But then it's expanded on that with the Premier League is the most obvious example of this at play. Again, this was something that they used to have in their cable business with NBC SM, but now it's a big selling point for Peacock. They've absorbed the WWE network. And then they've been building on that with some of their Big Ten coverage. And then, the NFL will get it's simulcast of Sunday Night Football, but there's a few exclusives in there. That wild card playoff, I don't have the figures in front of me, but that was hugely effective in generating signups just for that 1 year. And it's something that Amazon's going to try and do again next year with using that one game. NFL means everything. And then it doesn't have it anymore, but used baseball, the Sunday leadoff, which I think we're probably going to talk about in a bit later on, and again, it's also being linked with doing the same thing with the NBA. So again, with all of the streaming service, it's the one that's using sport as I guess a way to acquire and keep customers more than any other.
And Lydia, over to you on that one. I mean, when you're looking at the way that Comcast or the NBC Universal businesses run, what's your view on it? It seems like, for me, I don't know, they have a more mature approach or a more progressive approach than perhaps some of their other counterparts. It doesn't seem as, I don't know, bitty as perhaps the others, which I'm not sure that's the right way to describe it. What's your view on how they approach things?
Yeah, I think that's right, Nick. I mean, they do have that sort of heritage that Steve just sort of talked about in terms of breadth of experience, longevity of sports rights. We're seeing that translating into the Sky market. Like in a lot of ways, Comcast could have pulled the plug on Sky investing so much in sports in the UK, and in fact, it's sort of doubled down as you referred to earlier on. And I think they do still see it as the backbone to their product, which is interesting, as Steve said, in terms of like trying to sort of get this NBA piece now, which is, a really bold move and, very interesting to see how that will play out given the sort of the last matching right that WBD still has on that. But, they've gone in, big, but huge money for that as a way of being able to effectively, I suppose, short themselves against the Spulu offering, right? That was always a bit weird to me that they weren't included in that, but that could, as you say, be the reason because they already have that more established sports piece in the US in particular, and whether or not that will continue to have WBD in it in the future if the NBA goes to Comcast is another question. And I suppose that the other piece that they have, which I sort of know a little bit more about because of my time at WBD or Discovery, is they've always been very heavily invested in the Olympics. So it's a big sort of property for them. They'll have, huge viewing figures again this summer now with the Paris Olympics. The timing is pretty good for the US. It's only sort of certainly East Coast is only a 4 or 5 hour delay. So actually that will really, really suit prime time. And then they've got Milan in 26, which again is a good time zone for them. So, they're in a position to consolidate around that and to sort of keep people within the bundle because of the strength that sports plays.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting approach. They were one of the, I guess, first movers when they launched the Peacock offering, where they had the flexibility to use their rights in a more creative manner. We started to see ESPN do more and more of those deals using ABC as its free-to-air channel to expand the breadth of rights and do more, look at generating more income through advertising. But NBC just has a more mature business model around both of those aspects that seems to have been really successful. It almost feels like the NBC's approach is they've relied heavily and made some really big, meaningful moves with sports, particularly around the EPL. I think is the most interesting thing that they've done. That's outside the norm of the rest. But they also have a much more sports and entertainment approach rather than just building out a sports offering. It's a sports and entertainment offering. It's more holistically positioned. They don't have that dedicated ESPN style dedicated channel in the same vein, which may have served them well whilst others were trying to build these really powerful sports specific bundles or sports specific channels that were supposed to be the new holy grail of the industry.
I think you're spot on there, because I think that's exactly it. And I think actually that's really appealing to rights holders as well. That ability to offer content both in front of and behind the paywall, and ability to be able to effectively showcase your content to the widest possible audience and then drive people behind a paywall later. We're seeing a lot of those types of deals now in the UK, particularly like TNT's and Sky do it quite a lot, right, with some of the sort of sports rights now where they've got free-to-air windows or they're doing a simulcast on free-to-air with the public service broadcasters. And I think, increasingly the rights holders are looking for that breadth, which, Comcast is able to achieve because of its breadth of different products. And also, as you say, because actually it creates appointment to view, but within a more entertainment-led product, which sort of gives you a broader cohort of people.
No, I would just say if you look at their sports strategy, you've got Premier League, got WWE. Those are audiences that will sign up. They're very passionate audience, very engaged audiences, and it's big ticket events. It's NFL, it's college football. It's what they would probably do with the NBA. And again, as part of that entertainment focused product, they're using sport really effectively within that. So it's not a service for sports fans wanting to see a lot of sports, but it's the most important ones, or it's ones that have a really powerful niche.
And one of the other announcements that came out recently is they are also bundling up with Apple and Netflix to create their own bundle now. So you have the new JV bundle, which is now what's called Venue. Sorry, I should say. We talked about it before, and I still said it wrong. Venue, which is being launched literally just hours before recording this. They've launched their own bundle proposition to come to market. So we're seeing a bit of aggregation, but we're seeing a bit of bundling at the same time. And where's this content all going to be distributed? Is it going to be available just on everyone's requisite platforms? I'm curious to see, how do you think, Lydia, that taking these types of bundle approaches that say like Peacock are they going to have to launch their own new service again to service this bundle? Or do you think they'll package it up to sell that bundle to other distributors?
I think there's going to be two main ways in which they'll do it. You've basically just highlighted them both. I think for the Spulu, or the Venue as it's now been, I had to Google that. They actually say it is Venue rather than Venu or Venu or however else. It's like a DAZN all over again, isn't it? That one is a specific, separate, newly built tech stack with a newly built separate app, which I assume they will just want to take broad carriage across as many platforms as they can in order sort of to get the reach. Whereas it sounds as if from the sort of the information we're hearing that the Comcast Peacock, so the Peacock, Apple and Netflix will be more of a bundled proposition where it's pricing based bundles. So you still have 3 separate apps, but the ability to buy 3 at a much cheaper price than you would pay individually for them. And then similarly, we've also seen on the other entertainment side that we're looking at a Disney and WBD bundle as well, which again they haven't shared much detail of, but for their entertainment product, so for Max and for Disney Plus and ESPN. So we are consolidating around different brands, but it isn't going to look the same as the old cable model, because you're now at the mercy of all of the big tech giants who get to say, if you want to come on my platform, then you pay my 15 to 30% app store fees. So that will be interesting.
Looking at some of these big tech companies, particularly an organization like NBC Universal, but others we've talked about and we'll cover in the rest of this conversation, ad-funded premium sports rights is such a unique part of the American business model that's successful. Well, we've seen it being successful for decades now. Lydia, just from your point of view, from your experience working in different markets as well, just what is it that sets that market up to be so capable of driving enough revenue through advertising? Is it just the maturity of the media market? Is it just a willingness and the propensity for marketing spend to be invested into advertising in these sorts of channels that just outweighs basically every other market in the world that I can think of? What is it? Why is it able to achieve this? Or is it just because some sports are really built for it really well? Like, for example, the NFL is perfectly built. It's like a ready-built product for advertising, given all the stops and starts component. Why do you think it is such a prominent part, and really the only place where we've got a successful example of ad-funded models really being able to work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of all of those different ingredients. There is some fortuitousness around the NFL, as you say. It lends itself by having those sort of natural breaks, so it's not as jarring when you move to a break midway through a play, like you sometimes see in the UK with the PSBs the commercial PSBs when they're having to sort of still fill their 12 minutes of commercial minutage per hour. So that can that doesn't lend itself to such a good viewing experience. I think also, as you say, market maturity. This is, they've educated the viewer a lot better, I think, than we have. We have had we've had this prevalence of sort of very limited ads around premium sports in most of Europe for a number of years. So people are much more reluctant to sort of adopt that going forward. And also, I suppose, perhaps something is to do with the price of the cable bundle. It is, if you can somehow mitigate the cost of that by accepting ads in a program, I think people are a lot more willing to do so. But you're right. I think a lot of it is down to the type of sports that they have been able to make available and how they lend themselves to it. Certainly from my experience working in Europe in particular, it isn't quite as easy to do.
So, Steve, there has been the latest we've heard on the NBA rights is that it looks like NBA has the NBC has won those rights but there's a caveat. There's this matching component that WBD is able to match, but there might be a loophole. I read this morning that maybe they have to actually overmatch because of the distribution is slightly different from being OTA with NBC. Steve, do you have a lens on that? And then Lydia, you might have some further take on that as well. Just what is the status there? And firstly, what's the status? And secondly, how impactful do you think it is if they do win those rights for them?
So it sounds as though the NBC, I think the reported figure they've got is 2.5 billion for the. It's not quite the same package that TNT had. It's a bit smaller because they've carved some more rights out for Amazon and the package they are reportedly going to win. And as part of their exclusive negotiation window, they do have their previous contract, I suppose, they have a clause that allows them to match any offer accepted by the NBA. Now, again, the NBA could argue that because WBD doesn't have the over-the-air network that NBC has, they can't match that in monetary terms. And it's a bit similar a couple of years ago, completely different industry, but Liverpool had a kit partnership with New Balance, and New Balance's contract stipulated they could match any bid by anyone else, and they tried to match Nike's bid, but Liverpool argued that Nike was able to give more exposure through their channels and their brands and other areas of business. So it's a similar situation to that. So it could be the case that if WD is really interested or really is desperate to keep NBA, it may have to bid more than NBC because it can't offer the same benefits. And then there's the other thing I've been reading is that this clause is very ambiguous, and there is a suggestion they might try and match Amazon, which again, the NBA might argue that's not really what the clause is because that's a new package. So it could get interesting on that front, depending on and I think there could be some. The legal profession may be very happy at this because they're going to get a fair bit of business.
Yeah, Lydia, it sounds like this is destined for the courts if it goes down this line, right? Like, I mean, the impact this would have, particularly for TNT to lose the NBA, which is built it's at the heart and soul of its sports output, really. At least from what I can tell from the US side. I mean, I don't have access to it directly, but from the rights I've seen that it's built up a whole brand and a whole ecosystem around basketball. Do you think this is something that it would really cripple what they're trying to do at Warner Brothers Discovery with the TNT brand? And just what's your view on what Steve's run through with regards to the situation, predicament around the rights?
I mean, it's so fascinating. I would love to be a fly on the wall in these conversations at the moment. I was listening to David Zaslav last week when they had their Q1 earnings call, and he talks a good talk. He said that this has not come as a surprise to them. They have had 18 months prepare for this, and they have gamed every possible outcome, and they have all of their different negotiating strategies depending on what happens at what stage. And I can only assume that that's the case because certainly when I was there, that was exactly what we would used to do, right? We would have so many different options depending on how first round bids might go, etc. And there's no doubt that they will have gamed what happens if they pass the end of the exclusive negotiating period and still haven't, reached the deal. And perhaps they did, underestimate Comcast coming in such a vastly, inflated offer given the current value of those rights. And potentially they've also maybe misread whether or not the NBA is prepared to sort of lean on an alternative interpretation of the matching right. And as you said earlier on, that seems to have come out in the last few days. And I equally had heard, as Steve had said, that there's an argument that they believe they can also match, any other package as well, including, for instance, the Amazon package, which could be the sort of the fall over if they decide they don't want to go for a 2.5 billion. I mean, it's like 25 billion over the course of the next 10 years. Some people say, it's fantastic for their free cash flow, and that's how that's how the senior management are now being rewarded. So maybe there's another way they could spin this, and perhaps they could invest that money elsewhere into other parts. But you do have to wonder, don't you, if WBD doesn't have those rights, what they're bringing to the Spulu party. That was one of the key elements that they would have been bringing. So, it's fascinating. I'd like to think it won't go to the courts because the sort of the personalities of the two main negotiators involved, Zaslav and then NBA. I think that would be really problematic for the broader market. But you never know.
It feels like it's an interesting moment where the notion of getting the balance right with a media rights deal of the counterweighting between the check and then the reach that they're talking about here, that seems to be the new complexity to this. I'm not familiar of it getting to a point where it might be decided legally. I can see the decision making on the rights owner's side to say, hey, well, we've got an offer here and it's lower, but it's going to give us way more reach and we can generate more value from that in other means, to legally they're almost like putting a value on their OTA extended coverage that allows the courts to decide that even though that the deal is matched, it's not matching. I think that feels quite new.
Well, I'm not sure actually, because when we've done deals like that in the past, and you have like a most favoured nations clause, which kind of is effectively what this is by another name. Quite often, it won't be as black and white as if you offer us, X dollars, and that's what the other person offered us, then you will get, then you're effectively deemed to have matched it. Quite often, it will be based on a number of different criteria, because otherwise, people will argue, exactly as you say, that you're not comparing apples with apples, because a deal for 2.5 billion, but without the OTA or without the, possibly the marketing power that Comcast might be arguing they'll put behind it. So, it probably isn't ever going to be as simple as just saying, if you'll pay us, 2.51 billion, then the rights are yours. There will be other methods by which they will judge whether or not that deal is equal, but without seeing the language. But as an ex-lawyer, it's quite. I would like to see what that language is. But it isn't unusual to see some acknowledgement of the fact that you can't necessarily match an offer just by paying the same fee, particularly if your distribution footprint is a lot bigger.
Well, definitely one that is going to be. The NBA rights have been something that the industry has been talking about for a number of years because of the scale, the significance, and after the NFL's deals that happened that locked it in for the next 10 years, that really set this benchmark of huge growth opportunities. Plus, the NBA's brand skews younger; they're better on social. So, what was that all going to lead to? So, it's been very interesting to see how this has all developed and all the speculation. And now we've come to almost crunch time now to see what does play out here. And now the knock-on effects, well, I know we're supposed to be talking about Comcast and Sky here, but I'm spending a little bit of time talking about the knock-on effect here on TNT quickly. Anecdotally, if they were to lose those rights, playing the hypothetical game, the knock-on effect to their business would be they would not be able to ask the level of cable, the distribution fees, right? They would have to take a haircut on all those. Naturally, with their current partners, distribution fee might not be the right, carriage fees. Is that basically the core knock-on effect here, is that they would just lose out, they would have to renegotiate a lot of those deals because there'd be such a transformative loss of rights? Do you think, Lydia, starting with you?
I mean, it could be. I mean, a lot of these contracts would normally stipulate when you're licensing a sports channel out to a broadcaster, you will quite often have a content commitment, and that will, that could range from, specific named rights, which are, you will guarantee that during the life of this contract, you will continue to make those, those broadcast rights available on the channel. And there might be a termination right. There might be a reduction in the license fee, if you lose certain rights. Usually there's some sort of mechanism whereby there'll be the kind of the gold standard rights, which can, allow for a full renegotiation. And then there'll be some sort of lesser rights, which as long as you swap them out with something of a similar quality, similar, reach, similar kind of audience opportunity, then that will be fine. So I think that there will definitely be a lot of people examining all of the contracts to understand what that will look like. Even if, these have been incredibly well drafted or negotiated by WBD, and I would have no reason to think not, because their legal team is fantastic. Even at the end of those deals, that will be the test when they have to go back and they have to try and persuade their partners that the value of their portfolio, which usually the sports rights are sort of holding up the vast majority of, is still worth them paying the CPS that they'll be paying for.
Well, let's go. It's going to be definitely something interesting to follow, a knock-on effect of whatever does happen with these rights, that's for sure. Because also if they do somehow secure those rights, then it inevitably goes the other way. They're going to be asking for more money from their partners. So we'll see how that plays out. But look, I'm conscious of that we've spent a good chunk of time talking about the NBC and the NBA. So let's shift the focus on the Comcast business across to Sky more generally. For everyone's awareness or doesn't know, that Sky's business is really in three core markets, are in the UK, Italy, and the DACH region, or Germany in particular. They are, as far as I can see and say, they are the dominant sports broadcasters in those three markets by some stretch. Over the last few years, we have seen, or few, let's say, right cycles, we've seen a more pragmatic approach in some instances by Sky in terms of what they're investing into outside of their core. And even in markets like Italy and Germany, they have stepped away from some of those football rights that they used to own because competitors have come in the market, mainly DAZN in both instances, to upset that dominance to some extent. So, but still, they are the leader. And I think the UK, I'm always banging on about this, but they are in such a dominant position because they have this huge audience of paid TV subscribers. They're generating the income, the cash flow. Subscribers are probably as low churn as in any broadcaster that exists in the sports space that I could think of. And they've just doubled down recently with the announcement of their latest deal with the Premier League. So now they even own a more dominant share of the Premier League rights. They also own 1,000 matches a season of the EFL rights. I mean, Steve, is there? I mean, in terms of dominance from particularly a football perspective, which football in Europe and the UK is by far the number one sport in every market, they're about as dominant as they come, right?
Yeah, and I think that's in terms of sports broadcasting. I mean, it's great to have another player in the UK and with TNT going for it and serving multiple audiences. But Sky are by far and away the most influential. They've got the most Premier League. And what's kind of interesting is that for a couple of years it did seem that they might be a bit, they could be challenged by the emergence of streaming services. Then we had the arrival of Virgin Media as another platform that could, were they, and then were they also being slightly crippled by the cost of their Premier League TV deal? And kind of what's happened at Sky is they've doubled down on key properties. There's been a sort of plateauing in the rights fees they're paying for the Premier League, and then they've invested a lot in platform. And they've almost come through. It's a bit like Microsoft, right? They're so dominant. They're eventually going to find the right thing, the right strategy, no matter what really happens in the market. And then now, what we're seeing is almost a disaggregation of the content and the platform. So you can get Sky content on whatever platform you want. You can go D2C through themselves with now, and then their core proposition, Sky Stream, Sky Glass, they're really trying to invest in features and usability. And I think that's also what we've seen with Sky Sports Plus, which is what they announced last week. It's basically a new streaming offering for Sky platforms for Sky subscribers, whether that's on your mobile device or on Sky's TV platforms. And that's just, again, that's with the new EFL TV deal, that's with the new tennis deals they have, and with rugby league. And it's just a way of adding value to subscription. And it's almost as though they might be reevaluating what they're doing with sport. They've got their core sports, but now they might be looking for volume to fill that out. And I think it's just really interesting how Sky has managed to adapt over the last decade. I guess at the start of the 2010s, I think it was looking a bit different for Sky, and that's when they started diversifying away from sport a little bit. I think they thought they were too reliant on it. Whereas now they've come back sort of full circle. They've got much more diversity in their offering, but sport is still a huge driver of that. And I do think we should separate Sky in the UK from Sky in Germany and Italy, which have different backgrounds. They've made through acquisitions. Germany's never really been a strong pay TV market. So there's, and there's also, if you believe what you read, Sky is looking to perhaps leave the dark region. But in the UK, there's no one more dominant. I don't really see it it changing, even when the rise of streaming alternative broadcasters, because they've also inserted themselves in that world, right? With now they've got partnerships with Netflix, Paramount, Apple, and they keep on releasing great, really usable products.
And Lydia, obviously, you're very familiar with the UK market in particular, and obviously Sky's position in this space, and someone who's been in the competitive environment against them in some instances. Just let's focus on the UK before we do move to the European market for a little bit. Just how difficult have you found to sort of cut through in a marketplace where they are so dominant? Obviously, Sky is a telco as well, so they have the cable offering. They also have the telecommunications component, which gives them that extra stickiness as well, to make it even more difficult to come against. And for those that aren't following the UK market, BT's move into the sports space came at a huge time. You got a lot of coverage, was lauded because of the confidentiality in which that was able to pop up and secure some major Champions League rights at the time. I think was their first key acquisition. And that's probably been the most successful foray, I would say, against the Sky juggernaut. But ever since I can remember, those have had to walk away with either their tail between their legs or take a pivot their approach, or whatever you want to describe it as. So what's that dynamic like for you from your lens?
Yeah, you've described it very well, and I think you're right. There's been so many sort of pretenders to the throne. Those, the number of casualties to the Premier League throne has been quite scary over the years. I worked for Setanta Sports back in the day when I was a lawyer, and that was one of the first casualties of trying to go toe to toe against Sky in the UK. I think BT did a very good job. TNT obviously are now being able to sort of take over from that and complement that with the Eurosport rights, for instance. And it certainly seems to me as if the market's now just coalescing around the two, major sports providers in the UK. Amazon is dipping in and out. It's sort of, is it in, is it not? Is it taking rights, and then it only takes them for a 3-year season, and then it decides it's, not going to pursue those anymore. I think, there was a time where they didn't have that cross-selling relationship between BT and Sky, where effectively you were forced to literally take 2 subscriptions. You couldn't get Sky if you were, a BT subscriber, unless you also became a Sky subscriber, and vice versa. They soon, realised that wasn't helping anybody in the market, including their own bottom line. So they now have, and still have it now with TNT, this cross-selling. But you're absolutely right. There's a huge juggernaut with Sky. Sky, I think Steve's absolutely right. I think for a couple of years they did not take their eye off the ball, but just start thinking that maybe they needed to sort of put the brakes on the investment. And the Premier League, that sort of rights cost was just going insanely high. I think, COVID actually helped with that, because they had that natural rollover of the rights cycle. They didn't have to pay a greater amount. But as you say, they've got a telco business as well. They've got a very strong tech business. They're pushing people very strongly now to Sky Stream and to Sky Glass. Like if you go onto their website, Sky Q is now sort of the 5th option, sort of buried at the bottom of the web page. They really want to drive people there. And I think the big change that we saw, having negotiated against them for a number of years, was their eventual willingness to sort of open up their walled garden. So to Steve's point, they now just want to become a natural aggregator. They want you to stay in the Sky platform for as long as you possibly can, and they're now prepared to facilitate you going out to Disney Plus or even to Amazon Prime, which is an aggregator of itself, as long as you then come back into the Sky environment, because they've realised that as long as they can keep you there and you don't change your HDMI input into your smart TV or into another way, then they will, create stickiness. They will create customer loyalty, and particularly with having done those deals that they've done where they've bundled, Discovery Plus with the Ents package, and then the Paramount Plus with the cinema, and all of these different, and Netflix obviously being the biggest of those. They have played a very smart game. But I think you're right in that, Steve, that I see them doubling down now on sports. I think it's become such a crucial part of their subscriber retention play.
I was going to say, I was at the Sky Sports Plus launch last week, and I actually asked Jonathan Litch that whether it's going to change their approach to rights acquisitions, and he said it might well do. They're going to go for volume. I think they had trimmed a lot of the fat properties that weren't going to necessarily keep subscribers, I think, or had limited appeal. I think that's what we've seen with rugby union. I mean, I say this as a Harlequin season ticket holder fan. I love rugby, but I think there is a limited amount that you can acquire subscribers with. But who knows? We might see them come back into that if they can get enough volume to fill out this proposition. So it's really, really interesting to see what they do next on that front.
And it's helpful that they own their platform as well. They're able to stand up these IP channels and have. They said, I read the article the other day, 100 they can support up to 100 concurrent streams with Sky Sports Plus. So it's going to be incredible for them in terms of all of the football rights they've got, and also they're working really hard on their latency. I read as well that Main Event, they've managed to get the latency down to like 6 seconds, which is sort of DTT speeds, versus the kind of 35 to 40 seconds that we're seeing on most of the IP streaming platforms. So if they can continue to dominate the sort of tech advanced market as well, it's only going one way.
Yep. So Sky basically crushing everyone and setting the market. Basically, they set the market. They said if they want a set of rights, they can get them. And they can do more with them than almost anyone else. They have such a dominance in that space. I think it's been interesting to watch from afar how the TNT Sport relationship with them is now, to say, blossomed, for want of a better description. I remember one of the first ever Sports Pro Live event we had. We had who was the head of BT Sport at the beginning?
Jamie Hindhoff.
Can't remember who we had. I think it might have been Mark Watson. Actually, we'd lined up for it perhaps. Yeah. And we were talking to Sky's MD, and it was probably Barney, I think, at the time. I'm not sure if it was Barney or someone else at Sky that was going to basically speak at our event. They said, on one condition, BT Sport aren't allowed to be at the event. We're like, what? It was the first time we've ever come up against that, and we basically haven't had that since. But that was such a fierce rivalry of these new kids on the block cutting our mustard. I think that's the right term. There's such an animosity of having them even in the same room together. And then you fast forward a few years, you see the first. I remember the article that we wrote was Mark Alera, I think, talked about the fact they were doing this new approach, which was in partnership with Sky, and it's just interesting to see how that's evolved now. Now those relationships are much closer to each other, and better the enemy or the devil so to speak. So
exactly,
a lot's happened since then.
Example of frenemies.
So definitely one to follow, and it does. I think it does. I can't see how that market dynamic is going to change anytime soon, and that's the big thing. I think out of any other market, you can see someone else coming in and trying to upset the dominance with a big investment play, but. Look, Sky's position seems to be almost insurmountable for anyone to consider, and particularly there are so many wounded broadcasters along the way. But let's keep going because I'm conscious of time. Let's talk quickly about the Italy and Germany businesses, just because as you've set the scene, Steve, so we don't have to spend too much time on about the fact they are different to the UK side of things. We have seen them take some steps back, Steve, particularly on the football side, largely as a result of the moves that DAZN have made. What do you think the future might look like for some of those two respective organisations in those markets? Do you think they're just going to find their comfort zone in almost the same way UK has in terms of what it went through with regards to the UK stepping back from non-essential rights, being very pragmatic on what they're investing in? Or do you think there is rumours that they might be up for sale and that means that they're just going to be focused on that P&L wholly and solely? What's your view there?
Well, I'm much more familiar with the German market than I'm with Italy. And again, the Bundesliga is the most, they're one of the most important rights, but they haven't always traditionally been. It's because Germany has such a strong, I guess, sort of either free or basic cable ecosystem. Pay TV's never really taken off, and also Germany has a much stronger tradition of match going in match going fans in football. It's not really a TV market, so it doesn't really have the same dynamics as the UK has done. And also there's been more traditional reasons for that. Again, talk of turn of millennium when there was the big TV collapse, because basically the rights were bought for such a huge amount that they could never make the return on investment. So Germany's always been an interesting case in my opinion. But there's been a willingness to work with DAZN, right? Like there's distribution. They've been working on linear channels. The most interesting rumor has been, I think I'm remembering this right. There was talk of the Bundesliga almost buying Sky or investing in it, investing in it as a route to market. That'd be a fascinating thing to happen. I've got a really on the fence answer. I don't really know what's going to happen in those two markets, especially whether they decide the technology advantage they have means that they can have the aggregation play without being directly involved in rights. If there's one thing that is true about Sky and the relationship between those three markets is there's a degree of economies of scale in terms of technology. They also have strong links with entertainment programming, so they can subsidize productions, and so it could just be that they're happy with that aggregation play, supplemented by some important first party rights, and maybe they're okay with that as long as it's not a huge opportunity cost just by staying in those two markets.
Lydia, what's your view on Steve's thoughts on that market? Obviously, with business like Warner Brothers Discovery and having a Eurosport business that was so strong across the mainstream of Europe for so long, I'm imagining I don't know how strong Eurosport is in Germany in particular, but I imagine it's up there. Just what's your view on how Steve articulated that?
Yeah, it's difficult to sort of take a very firm view on that. I think you're right. I mean, there has been rumours for so long now around them, looking to divest the German and the Italian business. They are, as you say, they had some wobbles. They certainly did in Italy with the Serie A. That was challenging for them for a while, and then they actually saw some real leakage of subscribers as a result of losing those rights. They've now gone back in a very kind of controlled and grown-up way with their new Premier League's rights, so co-exclusive with DAZN, sort of the minority partner in those rights for the next 5 years, which sort of guarantees them, I think it's 112 matches, but they're also on DAZN. So again, it's another example of the sort of the frenemy relationship there. I think if they decide they're going to stick with those two businesses and they are able to, as Steve says, really lean into the cost synergies that they can get and to leverage effectively being able to go to their rights holders and say, look, we want to bid for a package across all three regions and use the kind of the heft of their UK business to effectively secure rights for Germany and Italy. I think it could be quite interesting. We saw them do that a little bit with us. They would like to see deal terms, across all three territories. And, it's a natural thing, isn't it, right? If you can say, we can give you three markets, but we want to pay a price that is this for them, and you allow the UK team to sort of to take the biggest hit of that because of the sort of the stronger P&L return, they could turn, it into a into a decent going concern. But if they're not able to sort of utilize those synergies and haven't been able to sort of get the talent out to the regions in the way that to sort of replicate the UK business, then and they do end up being sold, obviously it looks very different then.
Am I correct, Steve? Because you are the encyclopedia of knowledge and I am just someone who just guesses things half the time. The F1 Sky relationship, obviously F1 has got a really comprehensive deal in place with the UK. Have they got a multinational deal with Sky across the three markets as well, or just the two?
I think no, they're in all three markets, but they're part of the same deal. It is literally on the same piece of paper. I don't think so, but I think they are marketed as a multinational deal. But I have a feeling they're three separate agreements that may or may not be synced now. But there's definitely, in terms of how it works in practice, it is effectively a multinational deal in terms of how they cover the sport, and it's the same with tennis as well.
Oh, that's right, and obviously Sky is the home of tennis in the UK at the moment as well, right? So after taking those rights, the ATP and I think the WTA rights as well. So look, we can probably put a bow on the Comcast Sky part, other than as in they're pretty dominant in all markets, a massive player spending a load of money and doing a pretty good job of it all. Let's see what happens with the European parts of the business. I guess that Comcast investment was expecting a lot more growth in those markets than they've received. And you couple that with what's been happening with media rights more generally, and some would suggest that perhaps a detracting interest in premium live sports in the new era of fandom and the access you have through social media and the like. Maybe that's having a knock-on effect, but in the growth of that business. But time will tell. Right. I'm conscious we are running a bit light on time, so I want to just wrap on let's go quickly on Disney, and if we can, Paramount, but otherwise we can save that one for another day. Really, I'll quickly fire through Disney's approach, because we could spend a whole hour talking about them as well. But ultimately, ESPN, the US powerhouse in sports, they seem to have locked down the NBA rights and every other major set of rights that they think they need. They have a piece of the pie in almost every instance. There's no rights that I can think of that they've missed out completely, save for perhaps the Olympics, which there's the exclusive deal with the NBA, right? With NBC. What I think is most interesting is when we look outside of the US and what they're doing outside of those markets. Namely, ESPN has tried and failed in going international. Thankfully, I have ESPN Caribbean on in Jamaica, which allows me to watch some of their coverage here, which is a mishmash of the rights they do have on a global scale. But what I think is most interesting of late is the Disney Plus move they made. They finally made a move to basically secure rights for the Disney Plus platform in the Scandinavian market, or particularly in Sweden and Denmark. So I guess let's get the crystal ball out on this. We have to do too deep a look at the ESPN business as a whole. Because I think we've covered almost some of the fundamentals of the US sports market in what we talked about with NBC, but more just, does this feel like to you, Lydia, that this move by Disney to start testing in other markets, let's say like a market like Sweden and Denmark, is a sign of things to come with regards to having a sports and entertainment offering available, bringing those two worlds together rather than just a standalone sports product that they've been able to, or sports brand they've been able to build in ESPN?
I mean, until that announcement about the Scandi deal, I would have said absolutely not. I think, they've, as you say, they've tried and failed with ESPN sort of more globally outside of the US. It just hasn't had the brand power, hasn't had the purchase power, and it hasn't had the ability to sort of come in and make those big rights investments because of the existing, state of play in sports rights within Europe. I still don't see it. I still feel like, yes, in the US, they're hugely dominant. To me, I still think it's very bizarre to understand how the new ESPN D2C product is going to sit alongside the Spulu or the Venue opportunity. Initially that was going to be the first time that subscribers could access ESPN content outside of a pay TV cable bundle in the US, and of course that's going to be sort of preempted now by this JV. If I was to bet, I would say that I think that they would be more likely to see the value of sports as being a retention driver for subscribers, but potentially do something similar to what they're doing in the US and potentially do a JV or a bundling, commercial bundling relationship with another partner in a territory where they can effectively create a mini bundle which includes sports that somebody else can bring to the table, rather than trying to sort of do a massive investment, unless it is like the deal that you mentioned, Nick, where it felt quite opportunistic and as if it was the right deal at the right time at the right price. So the short answer is no, I don't think they will, but I think they will do something more nuanced in collaboration with other partners outside of the US.
Steve, one of the speculations I've heard from people in those markets is that Disney were trying to secure the Champions League rights as well, but they didn't get those rights. And there's been a deal done or largely agreed that hasn't made the airwaves yet, which I think is just an interesting layer to this, of whether it is just a real test case. So let's get a significant scale of live rights to play with and bring into the platform to see and test and see what that does, or make a bit of a bigger bet on rights. What's your view on what Disney is doing, and perhaps what if you were Bob Iger, what would you be looking at to do in the international markets?
Oh, if I was Bob Iger, I think I'd be enjoying my retirement, but the man loves Disney too much, which is fair enough. Also, just want to point out one thing: the ESPN is in the Netherlands, as part of the 20th Century Fox acquisition. So that's kind of an anomaly, I will admit. But Disney and ESPN's international strategy always has me a bit confused. I know they came in the UK, and there's reasons, as Lydia's alluded to, that didn't work out. They had ESPN Player, which has now been shut down, and the rights have been dispersed all over the place. I think beyond that, we're going to see just more opportunistic rights acquisitions that complement what they're doing with Disney Plus. Disney Plus, again, has, for its recent perhaps plateauing, it's got really strong brand recognition. People know it. It could be, if you look at it from a household point of view, someone might want Disney Plus, but the decision maker might want sport. So you have those kinds of things throw it into there to enhance the back catalogue that Disney has. And some of the marketing has already kind of alluded to this. So obviously we all know Disney, we all know films, we all know what, the great legacy it has on that front. But there's a whole marketing campaign in the UK about Disney Plus does comedy, like trying to say that there's other genres. So you can see sport sort of being part of that. Like Disney Plus also has sport, whether that is for example, Disney's not a country. Denmark and Sweden they have the Europa League and the Conference League, as an added extra. Whether we do graduate to things like the Champions League, there remains to be seen. That's going to be a much more significant investment. That's going to require a lot more modelling to see whether that's going to be get a return on that investment. But I think we'll see more opportunistic acquisitions, ones that, again, like I said, add value to the entertainment offering rather than they're going to attract sports fans in their own right. It's all part of that mini bundle.
Yeah, well, look, I think what we've seen across the industry alone the last 10 years or so is that sports-only offerings just don't have the breadth that it needs to be something that the subscribers are going to subscribe to at the scale that comes with the investment that needs to go into rights. So you have to build out sports and entertainment offerings. And I think Disney Plus taking this approach and having a sports and entertainment offering, or an entertainment and sports offering, allows them to have that dynamism to read and react when market opportunities arise. If they do want to take a further step in this investment into Denmark and Sweden does pay off, and it's a good testing ground for them to do so. So, time will tell, but always get a little bit excited when a new big player comes to the market and shows that they're willing to do something. So I know a lot of sports execs will be getting very excited at the thought that Disney's now officially coming to the table to put their flag in the ground internationally. Right, I think that is probably all we've got time for. I know we have more to cover, and I feel like yet again I've let myself down and let everyone else down by not covering the full spectrum of companies. Maybe we'll do a part 3 down the line in a few weeks' time or something. But I thought that the conversation around Comcast and Sky was a really interesting one, because I think there is so much to learn and take from that. There's more than just about those businesses. So, Steve and Lydia, thank you so much for joining us and giving and sharing your insights around this space. And who knows, maybe we'll pick it up and go for round 3 at some stage down the line as well.
Great. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Steve.
Now, before you go, if you liked what you heard today, be sure to rate and review and just let me know what you think on social. You can find me on most social platforms as SportsPro Nick. And please do spread the word of the podcast. There's no better way of marketing than word of mouth, whether that be in person or on social media. And if you don't like what you've heard, or you think we should be doing more or less of something, then reach out and let me know, as I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, Stream Timers. Until next time.